the New York Mets are going to make a run this year, they might need to add one more starting pitcher. Which arm makes the most sense for the Mets at the deadline? We'll run through them all on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, I am pre-recording all of the shows this week before my vacation, giving you a deep dive into the options for the New York Mets at the trade deadline. Yesterday's show should have been all about the top bats the Mets could acquire at this deadline. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about some relievers. Today, we're focusing in on the starting rotation. And I want to open things up going through what the Mets should be looking for at the deadline. And I think when you look at this team right now, you got David Peterson, an all-star. He should be good to go to make a playoff start. You think Kodai Senga should be good to go to make a playoff start. You hope Sean Manaea will be good to go to make a playoff start. That's 3. I believe what the New York Mets need to do this year at the deadline is make sure they add at least a 4th arm here that can make a playoff start, knowing that they still have Frankie Montas, they still have Clay Holmes, there's still other options. They got to get an arm, though, that when you make the trade, you think without a doubt, this is a guy that's going to take the ball in October. Not if he's pitching better than Holmes and Montas and Manaea. No, this is, you have to go out and get an arm that you feel confident that they can step up when it matters most. This is not a team like last year that could just get by, say, you know what, I guess we'll trade for Paul Blackburn at the deadline. The team last year, starting pitching was not the issue, and they were not a clear-cut World Series contender. They were a wild card team that had to do a lot to make it, and it was not necessarily a team that was worth giving up a bunch to win at all costs. This current Mets team, with Juan Soto, Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso, Brandon Nimmo, this core of a team, they deserve to get real reinforcements at the deadline. And if you're going to get a starting pitcher, it better be one that you trust come October. So I want to open it up with a team because we're going to go sort of by teams here, teams that could sell. And I want to start looking at the Marlins, and I've already talked about them, but just to reiterate the Marlins on this show, there's 2 arms that could be on the move, Edward Cabrera and Sandy Alcantara. Now, again, I did a whole show on this just recently, so you can go back and get more in-depth analysis on Edward Cabrera in particular. I would not be trading with the Marlins to get a starting pitcher at this deadline. Now, the reason why I'm not all the way on Edward Cabrera, even though he is very likely to be moved and he is in the middle of a breakout season, it's because I don't think that he is necessarily an arm that you can trust to win a playoff game. This guy's never pitched more than 100 innings in a big league season. How do you know how he's going to hold up throughout this entire marathon? And he's never pitched outside of a small market. He's never pitched in a playoff game. He's getting by right now, but he is a mechanical slip away from walking the world again and not being nearly as effective of a starting pitcher. And I would have some real caution about trading for one of these young Marlins arms after what happened with Trevor Rogers last year. Granted, Trevor Rogers is actually throwing the ball pretty well for the Orioles right now, but I just would not give up the assets it should take to acquire a pitcher that has 3.5 years of control, because it's not like Edward Cabrera is going to come cheap. I talked about it on that show. I talked about a package I'd be comfortable with. I'm not saying that I'm completely out on it. Once I see the return, if that trade happens, I will reserve the right to maybe judge it differently, but I would not give up a serious return for Edward Cabrera. And what I talked about on that show as well when it comes to Sandy is, at a certain point, while I love the upside, I think the contract is a good one based on a former Cy Young that you can have on an affordable number next year, and then it's a club option that you can always get out of. I think he makes a lot of sense. It has made a lot of sense all season talking about this fit, but he's not throwing the ball well. And I don't think there's any world where you can say, oh, yeah, he's going to pitch a playoff game. So for the Marlins, I'm kind of writing them off right now. To me, it's not the ideal team. Another team that I think is not likely, but I would love one of their arms. So I want to talk about them here is the Rangers. There's the Jacob deGrom pipe dream. We don't need to spend time on it. It's unlikely to happen. deGrom would have to want to come back to the Mets, and nothing indicates that he does. It seems like he's very happy in Texas, and the Rangers seem to be pretty happy having a future Hall of Famer that they can build around in their rotation. So I don't know if you can get Jacob deGrom and his 2.29 ERA back in the All-Star game. I don't know if you can pull off that deal. If you can, if you can find out through some back channels that deGrom would come back and he would waive that no trade clause and the Rangers might want to get out of that money, I'd be all the way in. I would love it more than anything. It's just not completely realistic. But they have another frontline starting pitcher who maybe they would dangle, and he would cost a lot, but he'd be worth it because he is an absolute dog come October, and he's having a great season, a better season even than Jacob deGrom, and that's Nathan Eovaldi. Eovaldi signed a 3-year, $75 million contract to stay with the Rangers in the offseason. Now, that contract a little bit backloaded. $53 million of that $75 million is coming in the next 2 years. He also has a no-trade clause as well, so he'd have to waive it and want out and want to go to a World Series contender. With that said, if Eovaldi's in, if the Rangers are actually going to float him, and again, there's been no indication of such just yet. They're still in the fringes of the playoff race in the American League. But if they fall off and they decide, all right, how do we take advantage of being sellers? We're not going to move deGrom. He wants to stay. We want to build around him. We have these young starting pitchers, Jack Leiter, Kumar Rocker. We got the foundation of a very good rotation moving forward. They might move Tyler Mahle, but Tyler Mahle's been hurt. They could move Patrick Corbin, who's been a revelation for them, but I would certainly not trust that one. Eovaldi is the name that stands out. Eovaldi this year has a 1.62 ERA in 15 starts. Eovaldi, since 2020, has had a sub-4 ERA every single season. And he is, again, like I mentioned, a dog come October. He's had 2 outstanding playoff runs in his career. He's made the playoffs 3 times. He's won the World Series twice. Has a 3.05 career ERA in the playoffs. That's a guy you get that you could put into your game 1 in a playoff series and feel great. I'd be all the way in on trading for Nathan Eovaldi. I just don't know if he's going to be on the table because, again, there is that no trade clause, and the Rangers could very well be in the mix. So what I want to talk about in the next segment is a couple of teams that are also on that verge of contender to not contender that have some arms that would really move the needle. So we're going to talk about a couple of AL Central teams in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can be. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. When I was using Monarch, I was shocked at all of those subscriptions I had that I was not using, that I didn't even realize I was paying for. Also, you start to get a sense of how expensive takeout is, how much that can pile up. I realized all of that using Monarch. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 14,000, unless we've already gotten there by the time that you guys are watching the show. We are getting close, and I'm recording this probably about 5 days ahead of its actual published date on Tuesday. So appreciate all of you who are tuning in right now. Again, hit that subscribe button, throw a like on the video, and leave a comment. Which starting pitcher would you want the Mets to go after at this year's deadline? So let's now focus on those 2 AL Central teams, the Royals and the Twins. You have the Detroit Tigers running away from this with this division. You have the Guardians, who I don't necessarily see an arm that makes sense. The Royals and the Twins, though, both have some starting pitchers that are really attractive. And I want to open it up with the Royals because there is another Mets reunion that could be on the table. I've talked about this on the show already, but it's worth repeating on a trade deadline show. Seth Lugo could be the perfect fit for the New York Mets. Got a 2.67 ERA and 101 innings pitched last year. I believe he got over 200 innings with a ERA of exactly 3. He pitched well in the playoffs. Should have no problem pitching in New York. Now, you might need to mend some fences, but he doesn't have a no-trade clause. He has a player option for next season at $15 million that he's pretty surely going to opt out of unless he got hurt. So he is in a contract year with a chance to go to a big market team and pitch in a playoff race. It's good for his career. And I also think a phone call with Jeremy Hefner, you should be able to smooth anything over. And it's just, hey, there's no threat of you actually going back to the bullpen. None of that. They're trading for you to be the pseudo ace. And yes, Kodai Senga, if he was healthy and right, he might be the game one starter. If Sean Manaea was healthy and right, you never know. But Seth Lugo has been a really good starting pitcher for the last couple of years. He is a guy that outperforms some of the expected metrics because the stuff doesn't jump out, but he's got that kitchen sink approach, has so many pitches he can throw at you. He's so cerebral. He just gets outs. And to me, if you're looking at a rental starting pitcher, that makes the most sense for the New York Mets. A guy that you feel good about taking the ball every fifth day for you down the stretch. It's going to be a 6-man rotation with Senga, but still the guy that has the ability to pitch every fifth day and to be a workhorse for you, someone that can pitch in October, someone that shouldn't cost too much on the prospect side of things because he is a rental. I mean, you could do a lot worse than Seth Lugo. Seth Lugo, to me, might be the best fit for the New York Mets to go after. There's another one I'll talk about in the next segment that's a rental that I also really like. But Lugo, if he's on the table, I would absolutely throw a nice package together. I wouldn't be giving up any of the top 3 pitching prospects in this system, but the Royals need bats. So can you send them a Ronnie Mauricio as a starting point with some prospect capital and get the deal done for a rental? I think they'd be very intrigued on picking up one of the Mets' young infielders. And I think that's going to be a big part of this deadline, is trying to find a way to utilize the glut of infielders on this roster to try to mitigate the prospect return going back in a deal. And the Royals are a team that is so inept offensively that they could really be intrigued by a Ronnie Mauricio, a Mark Vientos. And certainly if you were going to give one of your hitting prospects like a Jet Williams or Ryan Clifford or a Jacob Reimer, they'd be really in on that as well. But I think that this is a trade that you can get done, giving up one of your MLB infielders. And then, of course, the Mets have so much depth in their system. They can fill out a package beyond that that is attractive to the Royals. I think that Seth Lugo makes a lot of sense. Now, the guy that you might also get from the Royals that probably costs more because it's 2 years of control and cheaper control is Kris Bubic. Bubic is an all-star. He's been amazing this year, but they have Cole Reagans, who they've paid. They have a rookie lefty in Noah Cameron. And again, they only have a year and a half of control. So maybe they decide, you know what? They're going to try to reset hard right now this year so that they can go full force ahead in 2026. And selling high on Kris Bubic might be a better option for them. Bubic, again, 1 year of control after this season. He was okay early in his career as a starting pitcher, but nothing more than a back-end arm. Needs Tommy John surgery in 2023. Comes back as a reliever last year and pitched great. A 2.67 ERA down the stretch, helping the Royals make the playoffs. Now, as a starting pitcher this year, he's got a 2.48 ERA at the break. Granted, he might have one more start. Actually, no. I just did the series preview tonight, recording this before Mets Royals. He's not slated to pitch this weekend. So, yeah, that is his first half ERA. I will say, last 7 starts, a 4.24 ERA. So that is something to monitor. And if you're going to talk about the concern of Edward Cabrera, like I just did, on a career year, going from a small market to a big market, having never pitched a playoff game, all those things apply to Bubic, but Bubic is just a better pitcher right now, a guy I'd be more willing to take a shot on. But honestly, I think because the prospect return would be so much more, you would figure, than Seth Lugo, I'm still more in on Lugo than I am Bubic. I think this is a team, as we'll talk about more in the next segment, that doesn't have to get the arm with control. Although if they're going to, I like Joe Ryan from the Twins. Now, we don't know if Joe Ryan's going to be moved, but there is some rumblings that he could be. 2 years of control beyond this season. If the Twins end up out of the race by the deadline in a couple of weeks, or at least far enough out of the race, they might just see what they can get, and they can get an absolute haul for Joe Ryan. It's another one where I'd have to see what the return is, but I would trade one of the top 3 pitching prospects in this system in a deal for Joe Ryan. I would give up a Jonah Tong or a Nolan McLean or a Brandon Sproat if it means you plug in a real ace right now to this rotation that you have control of for 2 more years beyond this season. And it's cheap control through arbitration. I mean, Joe Ryan, he's got a 2.76 ERA this season, 104 and a third innings pitched, career 3.71, 29 years old, has really good stuff, strikes out a lot of batters, has been consistent all season long. He would absolutely be able to start a playoff game for you. And he's been so solid. I trust him for the next couple of years. To me, this is the guy that I would empty the chambers for at the deadline. If you're going to make one of those trades where you're really giving up a lot when it comes to a prospect return, don't waste those prospects on Edward Cabrera, even Kris Bubic. I like Bubic, but it's 1 year of control beyond this season and not much of a track record. Joe Ryan has a track record, and he's in a career year where he seems to have figured it all out. So Joe Ryan, to me, if you're going to get an arm with control, that's the one to really zero in on. It's just a matter of if the Twins are going to trade him and what is that return. Does it get to a point where it's just better off to hang on to a Nolan McLean or a Jonah Tong and say, you know what? We have those guys as our future rotation pieces. We believe that they are going to be starting pitchers in a New York Mets rotation for years to come. So all you got to worry about is right now. And right now it's 25 cents on the dollar compared to what it would take to get Joe Ryan to trade for Seth Lugo. So just trade the much lesser of return for a pitcher that honestly, while not nearly as dominant from a pure stuff perspective as Joe Ryan is, Seth Lugo, I think, can certainly match Joe Ryan's production down the stretch. So again, I'm more in on Lugo because I don't know what the cost is going to be on Joe Ryan. But again, if that's on the table and you want to get an arm with control, that's the one to target in my opinion. Close out the show, though, I want to talk about a team that I think really makes sense to trade partner for the Mets. Team I talked about on yesterday's show about the Bats. There's certainly 2 arms that stand out. So we're going to talk about the Arizona Diamondbacks and again reiterate what the New York Mets have to do at this year's deadline. What makes the most sense? Is it a rental? We'll go through that more to close out the show. Today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. Get the supplies you need from the site that's made for skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you're going to find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for that extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use the promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. If you're an everydayer that's always tuning into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. It's our texting service. We get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. You get the lineup graphic sent to your phone each day so you know in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Before I talk about the Arizona Diamondbacks and their 2 rental arms on the table, I want to run through some names that have been in trade rumors that I would not go after, and I have talked about them in the past, but again, worth reiterating on the starting pitcher trade deadline primer episode of Locked On Mets. We'll start with Luis Severino. I'm not really in on bringing back Sevy unless he comes basically for free. You shouldn't have to give up any prospects, that's a given, but I wouldn't want that contract on the books either. So the A's would have to kick in a lot of money. I think Severino might have to modify his player option and say, hey, I'll take less on the player option so that I can get back into a Mets uniform for the next year and a half and just hit free agency anyway. I think a lot would have to happen financially for that trade to make sense, and he has not pitched well this season anyway. He's been better on the road, obviously. That's the story, that he hates pitching in Sacramento. That mound is terrible, and the ballpark sucks, all that stuff. I get it, and I do think Sevy would be much better as a Met, but that contract is a really tough hurdle to get over. Now, Mitch Keller is also being discussed, and a lot of Mets fans are in on this. I've been pretty vocal. I am not. Now, I don't think Mitch Keller is a bad pitcher. I think he's a number 4 starter on a good team. I think he could be a number 4 starter for the Mets in the playoffs, and I think he could make a playoff start. Here's my issue, though. He's never played for another organization, homegrown Pirate. How is he going to handle going from Pittsburgh to New York? Also, traditionally, the last couple of years, he has been brutal in the second half after a very good first half where he's been either an all-star, which he was in 2023, or a borderline all-star, which has been the last 2 years. So great first half, bad second half, never pitched in a big market. And if it doesn't work, it's not just a rental that didn't work and you flush it. No, you're stuck with him for 3 years and $55.7 million. He is on your books for a while. I'm just not a fan of Mitch Keller. I'm not. I would much prefer the New York Mets to go after a couple of pitchers for the Diamondbacks. Instead of Mitch Keller, how about Merrill Kelly? Merrill Kelly, to me, makes the most sense outside of Seth Lugo. Those are the two guys that are on the top of my wish list as rentals that I think you plug in. You're going to trust that they're going to make their starts, and I think that they will perform come October. For Kelly, I think you're looking at a guy that has been very consistent and very underrated over the last couple of years. For example, I think most Mets fans are most just baseball fans out there that are looking for a starting pitcher at the deadline for their team. Their eyes will go to Zach Gallen because Zach Gallen has been the ace. Zach Gallen has been the guy that's finished, I believe, top 5 in Cy Young voting at least once, maybe a couple times. He's a really good starting pitcher. But this year he's got a 5.15 ERA compared to Merrill Kelly at a 3.41. And you look at their numbers since 2022, Zach Gallen, 3.53 ERA, Merrill Kelly, 3.44. Gallen's made more starts, but still, Merrill Kelly, whenever he's been on the mound, has been very effective. He doesn't walk a lot of hitters. He keeps the ball in the yard. He still gets his strikeouts. He eats up innings. And you go back to their World Series run, Zach Gallen, he had a 4.54 ERA. Merrill Kelly, a 2.25 ERA. He made 4 starts. Gallen made 6. So Gallen certainly was getting the ball more frequently. But when Merrill Kelly took the ball, he was nails. I really like the idea of a Eugenio Suarez plus Merrill Kelly rental spectacular where you send Mark Vientos the other way or Ronnie Mauricio. I think the Diamondbacks would appreciate the track record of Vientos. They very clearly have an opening in their corner infield spots. Granted, Jordan Lawler could be their third baseman of the future, but Vientos is better started to be a first baseman anyway. And if they trade Josh Naylor along with Eugenio Suarez at the deadline, not in the same package, but they deal both of those guys who are rentals, first base is wide open. I mean, they got Pavin Smith, but he's can be DH, and I think he's played a little corner outfield too. I just think Vientos would rake for the Diamondbacks. You're giving up 4.5 years of control. That's a good starting point. It's going to cost more than that to get both Kelly and Suarez because they can split those guys up and get a big return for a decent return for each of them. I don't know if I'd say a big return together as a package. They should get a pretty big return. So I don't think, it's just Vientos, but you trade Vientos. I don't know if you'd have to give up one of your top 3 pitching prospects, but maybe the tier below that. So maybe it's a Jack Weninger. Maybe it's a Jonathan Santucci that you put on the table. The guys that are right below that top tier. And then beyond that, maybe you have to add another prospect. But I think that you could pull off this trade pretty comfortably where your farm system wouldn't take a massive hit and you would get a plug-and-play middle-of-the-order bat that's going to hit 40 home runs this year very easily. I mean, what's he at now? He's close to 30 as I'm recording the show. He might hit 30 by the break. Merrill Kelly, pencil him in for a 3.5 ERA or lower, and a guy that has shown up in big moments in October. That, to me, for a combination trade is as good as it's going to get for the Mets here. And we'll talk about a reliever they have tomorrow, Shelby Miller. They also have another pitcher that the Mets could target that would help them a lot. So instead of Merrill Kelly, maybe the cost is too much. Maybe you like Seth Lugo more. You could always pull off a trade for Lugo and then pull off a trade for Suarez plus Shelby Miller, which, again, I'll talk about more on tomorrow's show. But I am all in on that idea of looking at the Diamondbacks as a trade fit. I'm rooting against them. I hope they lose a bunch over the next couple of weeks and are far enough out of this race that they say, you know what? Corbin Burns is out. He won't be back probably next year either. You got to just reset things. You still have a core to build around. You have Corbin Carroll. You have Ketel Marte. You have a lot of pieces that are going to keep you in the mix potentially next year. Make some trades that will replenish your roster for 2026. Get rid of the rentals. And that's where this is really the team to shop with when it comes to the rental market. And I really think that the rental market for the starting pitching side of the Mets deadline needs makes the most sense in a lot of different ways, because you look at the Mets rotation beyond this season. Kodai Senga still locked up for 2 more years. Sean Manaea, 2 more years. Frankie Montas, 1 more year. Clay Holmes, 2 more years, one of them being a opt-out. He has a player option for the 3rd season. David Peterson, you still have him for at least this year, and I would not be opposed to talking extension with David Peterson. And then you got the pitching prospects. Noel McLean, Brandon Sproat, Christian Scott coming off Tommy John next year. Jonah Tong, looking really good. And that's not even mentioning Tyler McGill. That's 10 options right there for your 2026 rotation before we even discuss free agency or making an offseason trade. To me, the Mets do not need to worry about their 2026 rotation at the deadline. You wonder, well, they've been attached to Mitch Keller. They've been attached to Edward Cabrera. Why are they attached to these arms with control? Part of that is, sure, if you're going to trade up a big prospect return, you want control. You want control back. Teams always are looking for control, and I get that to a certain extent. But I also think the reason why the Mets have been attached to Mitch Keller and Edward Cabrera is because the Pirates and the Marlins are 2 teams that everyone is pretty clear are going to make moves to the deadline, that they are going to trade Mitch Keller, that Edward Cabrera is going to get traded. So when you have these names out there as guys that will get traded, for one, it's easy to have a rumor on them, because having a rumor about Seth Lugo getting traded when they're 3 games out of the wild card spot, the Royals can easily have 3 hot weeks before the deadline, and they might be in playoff position looking to add, not sell. Joe Ryan, same thing with the Twins. I mean, you go down the line, the Rangers, the Eovaldi, like all of these guys, these teams are close enough that a couple weeks, they're not selling. The Pirates and the Marlins are going to sell. So those are the names that are out there. And of course, the Mets are going to check on these guys because they've been going through their own rotation struggles. Why not check in on Mitch Keller and see what it's going to cost to get him? Does that mean that Mitch Keller and Edward Cabrera are the 2 top names on the wish list for the New York Mets? I don't think they've made that wish list yet. I think that the way teams operate, you have All-Star break, you have the draft. Everybody is priming for the draft right now. You get through the draft. You get through that first weekend after the All-Star break, everyone's settling in, you're starting to move your eyes to it. And then those final 2 weeks before the deadline is when everyone focuses in. That's when teams are really starting to think about it. That's when they're starting to make preliminary calls. If we sell, who are you interested in? And there starts to be that back and forth. The Mets are like, are you guys going to call up the Royals? Are you going to consider moving Bubic this year? Are you moving Lugo? And you start to find out who is really on the market, who's actually on the table. And then you start having the back and forth, and you can really figure out which guys you do put on top of that wish list. But I think the only reason why Mitch Keller and Edward Cabrera are the names that have come out so far is because those are the guys that are definitely on the move. There's a lot of other arms that are on these teams that are caught in the middle. And it's a matter of figuring out which teams are sellers, which teams are buyers, who's on the table, and what you go after from there. But from my vantage point, when I look at the long-term outlook of the New York Mets starting rotation, when I look at 2026, 2027, 2028, I'm not worrying about those years right now. I'm really not. I'm worried about who is the best possible pitcher that can be acquired to help the New York Mets win a World Series in 2025. That's it, point blank. And in turn, if you trade for a rental, you keep some of that future flexibility. Not saying you can't trade prospects, you have to hug them all, but you might want to make a move in the offseason. There might be someone that's on the table that is an even better pitcher, or maybe the missing piece in center field is available and you can swing a big deal. You never know. So you always want to be mindful of what you're giving up. And to me, shopping in the rental market, when you have such a surplus of pitching in the future going forward that you don't have to necessarily be concerned, this is not going to be a team for the 3rd consecutive offseason that has to build out an entire starting rotation. You got currently 5 guys that are pretty established starting pitchers already on the depth chart, not even including Tyler McGill and not including all these pitching prospects that are on the way. So I think the Mets are in a really good spot beyond this season. This year, they have too much question marks with Manaea and Senga and the health of those guys. The fact that Frankie Montas is a complete unknown right now. The only guy that you really know at this very moment going into the All-Star break that should be ready to go to make a playoff start is David Peterson. That's it. And so with that in mind, I definitely think the Mets should be shopping for a starting pitcher, but I'd be looking at the rental market. I'd be looking at veterans who I feel really good about coming in here and making the most of the final months of the season as they enter contract years. It's always good to have a guy that's pitching for something else as well. And Seth Lugo and Merrill Kelly are pretty high on my list. I will say Zach Gallen I'd absolutely be on board with as well. He's had 2 good starts in a row here where he struck out 19 batters across 13 innings pitched where he's allowed just 1 run. So all of a sudden, if Zach Gallen has another 2 really good starts, that's probably the piece the Diamondbacks are going to get the most for at the deadline. And that's where I think I'd still settle on Merrill Kelly, knowing that there's been a lot of inconsistency with Gallen this year. And in the playoffs, he wasn't as good. And the cost might be more for a guy that hasn't been pitching as well. I think I would go with Kelly, but also I get the upside and the intrigue of Zach Gallen as well. So those are the 3 rentals that jump out: Zach Gallen, Merrill Kelly, and Seth Lugo. When it comes to arms with control, I'm a fan of Joe Ryan first and foremost, but Kris Bubic I think would be an interesting option. I would just be I'd be curious what it would cost to get him. And that kind of rounds it up. Those are the 5 pitchers that intrigue me the most at this year's deadline. Also, of course, those Rangers as well. I mean, if DeGrom's on the table, I mean, there's no one I want more. It's just, I don't believe it's going to happen. And I also am, I'm pretty doubtful that Eovaldi gets moved as well. But Eovaldi, of course, would be an awesome fit for the Mets. Anyway, that's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. This week is all about the trade deadline. Yesterday's show, again, I broke down some of the top bats. Tomorrow's show should be looking at some of the closers. I think the New York Mets should get Edwin Diaz a Robin to his Batman. So if you don't want to miss out on that show, you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on the audio side, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every single day. Now, for your second watch, check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube that covers everything in the world of sports with our local experts from each team, league-wide experts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.